Hello everyone. We are in the MOOC Swayam course on nationalism and constitutional growth in India, 1858 to 1920. Friends, we have been discussing about many of the events which ultimately led to the freedom struggle of India, starting from the establishment of Indian National Congress in 1885. Prior to that, many of the events we discussed, theoretical and conceptual. Let us now ponder over one of the important and decisive and defining concept called nationalism. Nationalism has been a very, very important intellectual idea, an ideology which shaped the course of history, not only in Europe, but almost every nook and corner of the world was impacted by this ideology called nationalism. Now, there are various aspects of nationalism. First, we need to understand what is nation, what is state, what is nation state. Also, to layman understanding that is nationalism equivalent to that what we call it patriotism. These are some of the questions which we all grapple with, and because of the intricacies and because of the overlappings, we get confused with nationalism or the feeling of love for one's country. And in this idea, it also in a way creates a very exclusivity. It in fact embark on something that what we call it, that who owns the nation, who is the owner of the nation, and what constitutes the nation. Is it language? Is it religion? Is it ethnicity? What is that which demarcates the boundaries? What is that which defines the very self? And if we're defining the self in terms of nation, then of course we are also marking the very boundary for the others. And this self and other dichotomy, in fact, populates the very discourse on nationalism and also the very history of the concept called nationalism has been a very, very defining moments rather in the history of the world, starting from 1648, that we call it Treaty of Westphalia. This is also known as Peace Treaty. When the European states concluded the ongoing war, they identified their some of the uniqueness, distinctiveness, and they found that the boundaries can be demarcated based on those distinctiveness. The racial, the uh, denominational, the linguistic, and hence the idea of French nation Portuguese nation, Spanish nation, German race. These, in a way, ingredients became the defining feature of making the state. And prior to the state having the very clear cut definitions in a very exclusive sense. And in a way, that creates a very homogeneous kind of society, homogeneity, in which that what we imagine that the other or the one who do not belong from us or who do not belong to us, they are the other. And hence it becomes a very exclusive kind of ideology. So if you do not speak, for an example, French, you do not belong from the French nation. You do not speak Spanish, you do not belong from the Spanish nation. And of course, that became also the unit of analysis in international system, in international relations, starting from Treaty of Westphalia, that what we also in a way take into account the history of nation states in the modern sense. And then on, every state in the world or every society in the world has been imitating, has been captivated in a sense with this idea of homogenization, of identifying nation. And then that has a certain kind of seeds of majoritarianism. As I said, that there are many things that nationalism encompasses. There may be the very import of the European ideology called nationalism may have a very instrumentality in terms of doing some good. And it did good during the freedom struggle. And in fact, all over the world, the very European idea called nationalism, in fact, was the driving force to oust the colonial masters. So it was utilized in a very instrumental sense. It was created in such a way that it became a kind of, though derivative, but it helped. So we call it Indian National Congress, for example, or we call it Indian National Movement. We imagine the India is one nation, and we do not, in fact, go by the European, demarcation of boundary, or we do not go by the question of who owns the nation. But it creates the possibility, the ideology creates the possibility for defining, for going back into the history by invoking, a very distinctiveness. What is the distinctiveness of our nation? Is it diversity? Is it heterogeneity? What is that? And that, in a way, creates a very rupture in a society. And we will see in this lecture the definitional aspects to understand the conceptual category of nation, nationalism, and state, of course. And then we will see that how these are very much related with our day-to-day politics, day-to-day understanding of nation and nationalism. So moving ahead, if you can see on the screen that, what is the definition of nation, how to define a nation. Now, there are many scholars, starting from Ernest Gellner, Ernst Renan, to Eric Hobsbawm, to Anthony D. Smith, to Benedict Anderson. Many scholars, and in fact, I will come to that discussion later. Many scholars, and there's something called nationalism studies. Many scholars have been pondering over. Some call it that it's a very natural thing to have a nation. Some call it it's a it's because of the historical change. It happens, and some call it it's just mere imagination, sheer imagination. It's a construction. It's not a real thing. It's imagined. So what Gubernau defines a nation. A nation is a human group with awareness, shared culture, mind it, shared culture, territory, common history, and a future project, claiming the right to self-rule. Now, as I said, the anti-colonial nationalist movements all over the world, in fact, were anti-colonial movements particularly because of the very demand for right to self-determination. Swaraj, that came from the very idea that the alien, the foreigner, cannot rule on us. It's only we, the people of this land, it's we, the people of the land, who have a shared history, who have a shared culture, and not the one who has just come up from somewhere, do not understand our language, do not understand our religion, and comes up with a very distinctive cultural understanding of their own. And only because of the fact that they have a power, brute force, and they want to control us, they do not have a mandate, they do not have a very authentic, logical kind of, kind of justification to say that, they can rule, right? So, so in a way that it's a nation is a human group with awareness, right? With shared culture, territory, common history, and a future project, right? We always come up with Vision 2030, Vision 2050, right? We want to take forward the progress, the growth, the development of our country. And hence, we all are, in a way, putting our effort to achieve that goal, the future project. Unlike the very future project was not defined by the colonial masters, rather, for them, their only project was exploitation. So, in a way, nation is a human group with awareness, shared culture, common history, territory, right? That encompasses the very idea that what we call it nation. Now, the objective criteria for nationness include statehood, ethnicity, and naturalness. And we'll come to that later. So what objective criteria, right? Objective criteria for nationalness, and hence this very criteria that what we discussed in terms of Treaty of Westphalia in Europe, that the very nationness, the very identification of nation leading to formation of a state, Spanish nation, the Spaniards, and hence Spain is a state, France is a state, German race, Germany is a state. So German race, nation, German state. So in a way, this very criteria, objective criteria for nationness include statehood, ethnicity, and naturalness, right? So, I mean, so what could be the ethnicity for, say, German race? So of course, the ethnicity here, that what we call it, the very unique kind of, identifying marker, right? And naturalness, right? That it is quite natural that there is, I mean, we call it like, Tamil language is spoken in Tamil Nadu, right? And I mean, Tamil language is not spoken in UP or Bihar, right? But it has some kind of territorial boundary, right, in which Tamil language is spoken. So just the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu is Karnataka, and their Kannada language is spoken. And then you have a Malayalam speaking state called Kerala, right? So it's very natural that the people within that territory speak one language called Tamil, right? Or Malayalam, or Kannada, or Telugu, right? And that's a kind of, very, very natural of those people. Also, challenges arise in objectively demarcating national communities, leading to contested definition. Now, this is statehood, right? This particular idea understands that a group with its own state is a nation. Now, the term nation state reflects this perspective, right? And I think I have dealt with that. And this raises questions about non-state nations and freezes existing state configuration, right? There are many states. There are many nations, rather, if you go by that distinctive, understanding, right? So Roma nation, for an example, without a state. Rohingyas, for an example, without a state, right? These are the communities who do not belong, to anywhere, or rather, they are stateless people, right? So the very sense of belongingness, that they do have an imagined land, homeland, and they do find their narratives and assertion. They articulate, right? That they are from, they speak a very different kind of Bengali, right, called Rohingyas, in the state of Arakan in Myanmar, right? So they have a differences, right? Also, this very idea of ethnicity associates national self-determination with ethnic groups, right? Ethnic communities can govern themselves, right? All the ethnic communities, they should have freedom, autonomy, to preserve their culture, to preserve their history, to preserve their artifacts, to preserve, right, whatever they feel like, right? It's part and parcel of their, self-rule, very idea of self-determination, right? And this challenges in defining and policing ethnic boundaries, right? And of course, right, this because of the overlap, because of various kind of intersectionality or intersections, uh, it becomes nearly impossible to have a demarcated uh, kind of boundary, right? And then this naturalness, right, which considers geographical features like mountains and rivers as natural borders, and these features can either divide or unite communities, right? So, moving ahead, if you can see, what is the subjective approach to nationalness? Now, most theorists adopt a subjective approach to defining nationalness is awareness and acceptance of a claim to nationhood among the people are very crucial, right? If there's no acceptance of a claim to nationhood, right, then it becomes nearly impossible then, right? So people need to be aware. People need to be kind of aware, conscious about their nationhood, right? I mean, whether on linguistic ground or whether on their cultural history, right, or uniqueness, they need to be aware. The awareness is important, right? And mind it, that can also lead to a very disastrous thing. Making too much aware, about kind of very uh, unique kind of identity markers that can actually lead to intolerance, right? So that also need to be taken into account. Now, Margaret Moore suggests defining a nation is based on self-identification and territorial affinity, right? Self-identification, as I said, self and other, right? That the other is in fact identified to define the very self. The other is identified to define the self. So hence, again, this is a very important and very, it's a very emphatic rather, idea that defining a nation is based on self-identification and territorial affinity. So we belong, we the people of India. You say India, we are not only imagining India as an idea, but we are also imagining India as a physical entity, a territorial entity, right? Now then comes the very important scholar called Benedict Anderson, and it's a book particularly called Imagine Communities in 1983 that proposed that the nations are basically nothing but imagined political community, right? This is an imagined political community. We imagine, right? And hence, based on that imagination, we try to define ourselves vis-a-vis the other, right? So, I mean, the Hindu nation, for an example, vis-a-vis the other culture, other religion, right? Now, whether Hindu is a culture or religion, right? Or then associating, Hindi with Hindu, and of course, then, Muslim, for an example, so Mughals, Muslims, Urdu, right? And this in a way leads to a kind of categorization of various uh, symbols, markers, right? Which in a way creates a very distinct kind of identity, right? So when one is defining vis-a-vis the other are also defined as a nation, but that is not taken into consideration. If I am defining myself as a nation, and hence I have a cultural history, I have a various other kind of claim over the nation, and hence I'm saying that who belongs to this entire paraphernalia of nation. Then of course, who do not belong, we are also saying that they are different nations, right? So if they are different nations, the way they are, belonging then, right? And hence this very idea which leads to religious persecution, marginalization, deliberate uh, kind of attempt to minoritization, and not sharing power, and many other things actually happens. Now, the notions of common history, religion, and language will play a mix of fact and myth. That's what Anderson says, and then that's important, because the fact and myths are actually wedded in a way that it gives a very good package to basically come up with a narrative, right, which actually says that you know uh, this and this belongs to our nation and this do not belong to our nation, because we have a history that dates to ancient times or something like that, right? Now, symbolic aspects of nations, if you see, anthropologist Clifford Gaze challenges the illusion of repeating units in political atlases. Right? What does that mean? This is Gaze is challenging the illusion of repeating units, right, in the map, in the cartographic imaginations. So a nation is not something that is, but something that does, right? And hence nation is a dynamic concept. It's not, what nation does, that is important. What nation is not so important, right? And when nation does, nation is in fact in the action, right? And hence, when nation does, nation is not, sort of, nation is not static somewhere, right? That's what the label nation is a construct that serves as a system for classifying people, emphasizing its symbolic and dynamic nature, right? So in a way that it actually classifies people, like classifying into categories of people, and the who belongs and who do not belong, who are self and who are the other, right? So sameness, right, and differences, right? So sameness, like same uh, kind of language, same religion, same, and so sameness is rather promoted in that sense. Yeah. So as a student of political science, you all must be aware about that there are four very important ingredients of that what we call it a state, right? One is population, one is territory, one of government, and then sovereignty, right? So population, government, territory, right? The moment we come to territory, right, we have a cartographic imagination of our land, right? And it belongs to within the world map somewhere, right? And then we call it that state because that state, having population, government, territory, has also sovereignty. It can now freely determine, without any kind of compulsion from outside, it can determine the very rule, or it actually claims that it claims the ownership, right, through sovereignty. It commands the obedience of the people, right? So now Where comes the nation into these four ingredients, right? It's a population, government, territory, right? And then sovereignty. Where comes the nation to define the state, right? And that becomes problematic, right? So when we define our state's uniqueness, and when we define we the people of India, right? Now this we the people of India, the emphasis should be on we. Who are we? Are we Hindus? Are we Muslims? Are we Christians? Who are we? Right? So hence, all over the world, right, we the Germans, we the French, and there comes the problem, right? There's an exclusivity which owns the state, right? So what it says, attachment to a nation. Each person has a sense of attachment to a nation, right? Because we are now going to have an attachment, we are going to have a feeling, right? So nationalism leverages this shared attachment for political justification, right? Because nation does, right? And hence it's a dynamic concept, and hence it justifies that what we are doing, what we are making, what we are envisioning, right? That is ultimately to achieve something, right? And hence the very idea is rooted into that kind of society we want to envision, is much of a monoculture kind of thing. So it is, there's a misuse of terms, right? So states have sovereignty over territory, right? United States, Great Britain, Nigeria, right? Nations contribute to identity and loyalty, sharing common history, myths, culture, economy, and rights. Nation states in the academic sense are rare. Most countries have multiple national groups, right? Most countries have a yet the very onslaught of nationalism to abuse this ideology to make it the politics more lively, so that those who want to cater to their needs to capture power, they are very much sailing on the boat of nationalism, right? Now what is national identity? We call it like national identity: Indian, German, French, right, British. As I am a British national, I am an Indian national, right? So that becomes, because of the international system, right? And within the international system, as a nation state become a unit of analysis, right? In the very beginning, I said, and because of that, like in terms of sports, for an example, we compete against the other states, right? So India and China playing, say, hockey, or India, Australia playing cricket, right? So we got India and Australia, right? So Indian players, Australian players, right? So it's of course, there is certain kind of boundary demarcation in which that people living in this territorial boundary are called Indians, and hence they are going to compete against the other peoples. We have a taxation policy, we have a government, we have a lawmaking bodies, we have armed forces and other things, right? So hence, it actually to some extent makes sense, right? National identity, but having national identity may not be called as that. We need to have a nationalism as well, right? So again, this idea, individuals often identify with a state when expressing national identity, right? And there's a misuse of nation and state terms in geopolitics generates loyalty to the state through national identity. Now, nationalism and political action, right? So, what is the definition of nationalism? Belief, and we will be dealing with this nationalism because we are in the book Swam course on nationalism and constitutional growth, we need to understand the very first term in this course called nationalism. This is an opportunity for you all and for me to ponder over this question, so that we will be able to kind of take away something which will actually generate certain kind of thinking capacity, so that we will be able to apply this kind of shared knowledge. So uh, so what is the definition of nationalism? So belief that every nation has the right to control a piece of territory. Also, shared nationalism defines a nation with a natural right to its own state. Right? And that, in a way, in the very beginning, I kind of discussed this idea that a right to control a piece of territory. So who is every nation has, right? So if you are defining, say, so India is a multinational state, right? We have so many nations, right? And still we are calling it one nation, right? At the moment we call it one, that's a kind of flawed imagination, right? So if we are going by the definition of nationalism, so every Mizo nationalism, right, or Naga nationalism, or Tamil nationalism, or Punjabi nationalism, right, all can actually then say that they have a right to control on a piece of territory. Okay, so if we want to bind India in one entity, then this very idea called nationalism need to you know go in the barracks. I mean, go in the rather it should not be applied. It should not be talked about. Much rather in a very in a very heterogeneous sense, in a very diverse sense, like unity in diversity, and that would be rather a very great kind of instrumental force in uniting India as one entity, right? Also, nationalism claims a nation is incomplete without territory, right? So Palestinians, for an example, or Rohingyas, for an example, or Israel, erstwhile, say, Jewish demand for homeland, right? Or for that matters in South Sudan, like, or various other demands, like Catalans in Spain, or Basque there in Canada, right? All these are manifestation that that actually leads to a kind of territorial demands, like in Tamil nationalism in Sri Lanka, right? And geopolitical situations are considered unjust if a nation is denied its own territory, right? So, what is the historical impact of nationalism? Nationalism often justifies conflict for territorial rights, and I think that's self-explanatory. Historical examples like the formation of the United States highlights the use of nationalism in gaining territorial control. And in fact, in our part of the world, I mean, we utilized nationalism, right, to oust British government. In fact, we were very successful in that sense. And also, ongoing use of nationalism for territorial protection, and that leads to armament, that leads to building up army, big army, right? And that's kind of problematic thing, and nationalism do plays a very significant role in fact armament. Anti-colonial nationalism, which in a way is a very decolonization process, in fact, embarked on the journey by utilizing, nationalism as an ideology, very, instrumental ideology. Civic nationalism is something which one needs to kind of understand, right? What is that? It describes a nation as people identifying as citizens with equal political rights. And hence, you are not defining the other person like, you're Hindu, you're Muslim, you're Christian, and hence you all are nations, and who belongs in majority are the custodians or owners of the nation. And the simple civic nationalism means you are identified as equal citizens and you have a right, and also emphasizes shared political procedures, not ethnic descent as the basis of national identity, right? So Hans Rena, as I said, that who wrote, one rather it was a speech, "What is a Nation?" There, Rena presents the idea of civic nationalism and defines the nation as a daily referendum, relying on the will of its people to coexist. Now, what is civic versus liberal nationalism? Again, civic nationalism focuses on political identity, not ethnic descent, and this is often associated with liberal nationalism, but maintains distinction. Let us conclude. In conclusion, what I can say that this is a very nationhood criteria. In fact, is provides a very distinct character. Uh, each country has a unique character and worth. This awareness of distinction. I mean, to be classified as a nation, a group must be aware of its distinction from other groups, and ultimately, if we define again, a, a nation is a collection with a common, unique cultural identity existing for a long time, forming the majority in a specific territory. So, there's a very idea called nationhood and self-determination argues that a nation is objectively defined even if not advocating for self-determination. And this, defines, highlights the diverse criteria that can classify group as a nation. We will be uh, dealing with some of the questions related with nations and nationalism in a series of lectures, so that we should not leave any of the ideas and any of the scholars who have contributed immensely in this field of studies, so that at least when we are ending with this course, right, we should not have only the factual timeline history of India in terms of constitutional growth starting from 1858 Government of India Act and to all the reforms, but rather we need to have also a conceptual kind of understanding, so that when we are into our times, in our contemporary times, and understanding contemporary politics, because ultimately history cannot separate itself from politics, because that what is politics of our time is going to be history tomorrow. And hence it is very important to understand this very important ideology which actually guided the not only anti-colonial movement, but even in the post-independent India, nationalism was used, abused in such a way that today, when we confront with this ideology, we do have a lot of challenges. We to just not talk about in a very critical sense about this ideology, and I think this is a very important opportunity to engage in a conceptual sense, not in a day-to-day political sense or using symbols and examples, rather in a very theoretical and conceptual sense, that what when we say nationalism or nation, what do we mean by that? In a very simple sense, so that at the end we will have much of a understanding and a comprehensive kind of understanding of this concept, and also we'll be able to elaborate and also ponder over by adding more information into that. So thank you so much. And we'll have a more interaction further. Thank you.